reste-t-il de nos amours? Que reste-t-il de ces beaux jours? Une photo, vieille photo.
He was born in 1932 in the Pigalle, yes, area. The real life was in Pigalle, you know, very mixed by entertainment, coffees, restaurants, prostitute, workers, petits bourgeois, and so on. So it was his area. And he was very free because his parents doesn't take care of him, you know. And he went to school, but he was a very bad boy in the school. He left every time to go to see movies, you know, with his friend Robert Lachenay. I think his dream was to be close to the Tour Eiffel, because when he was young, when he discovered Tour Eiffel, it was a trip for him, a journey, you know. He left his place to go to see the Paris, the big Paris, you know.
I think Truffaut searched for an ideal form of filmmaking, which is for most of us a total dream, and it's quite unattainable, I'm afraid.
He made his first film about himself. A lot of directors do that, but nobody's done it quite so successfully as in 400 Blows.
Je mens de temps en temps, quoi. Des fois, je leur dirais des choses qui seraient la vérité, ils ne me croiraient pas, alors je préfère dire des mensonges.
Pourquoi n'aimes-tu pas ta mère?
Parce que d'abord, j'étais en nourrice, puis quand ils n'ont plus eu d'argent, ils m'ont mis chez ma grand-mère.
He himself had a terrible childhood. He was farmed out to his grandparents by his parents, and they didn't look after him very well. He took all sorts of different jobs. He finally went into the army and then misbehaved there.
He was a kind of lost boy when he was found by André Bazin.
Only Bazin saved him. Really, if Bazin hadn't said, "Come and write for us," I don't know what would have been the fate of Truffaut. He'd probably never made a film.
André Bazin took him out of jail, actually, and helped him to build himself as a adult and a human being. Cahiers du Cinéma was created in 1951. What made it quite immediately so alive and so remarkable was around André Bazin, a group of very young film critics, among whom François Truffaut.
The first article, the very important article he wrote for Cahiers du Cinéma in 1953, he was 22 years old, so he was a very young guy, passionate by cinema.
André Bazin not only gave them jobs, he didn't actually pay them much for the work they did, but they were certainly began to be noticed. And he would sit watching films with them. Very often he had diametrically opposed views to them because he was more conventional as a critic, although he was a great innovator in his own way. But they'd watch, they'd discuss, and then they'd write.
He spent 1 year with Roberto Rossellini in Italy, in France, in Spain, trying to make a film with Rossellini. He wanted to be inside the cinema.
With the Cahiers du Cinéma, he kind of bonded with people of his generation, and they formed this sort of crazy family that was fond of films and fond of the idea of making films in a different fashion.
What they wanted, and they included Godard and Truffaut and Romer and Chabrol, what they actually wanted was to stop being critics and to start making films. And the Nouvelle Vague was really their attempt to make a personal film before they reached the age of 35, which they all managed to do.
Apart from what they were about, simply in their way of storytelling and the way of and their healthy subversive anarchy, were a great influence on one's thinking as a filmmaker as well as personally.
He married a girl who was also a filmmaker, and being a hoodlum, he actually attacked her films while he was married to her. And the father, who was a producer, said, well, if you think you can do so well, why did you make a film then? And actually gave him some money to make a film.
He really was a punk, he was a rebel. He showed us a way, a new way to do movies, a way also to do movies with very little money.
They didn't like the sort of highly theatrical French films which most Europeans rather admired and rather liked. They wanted to be much more personal, do something which was completely different. The cinema was life to them. It wasn't theatre, it wasn't literature, it was life.
The French industry was a little bit stiff, very conventional, and Truffaut came and he said, there are no more rules, we can do whatever we want.
He decided he'd make a film about his own life, and he chose Jean-Pierre Léo because Léo seemed to be rather like him.
Pressé? Mais pourquoi? Petite fille a dit qu'il ne laisserait pas rentrer. Tu crois que le ferait? Sûr, faut pas de piffet. Have you money? Ouais, je change de cantine. Alors fais-moi confiance par ici la sortie. Qu'est-ce qu'on va foutre maintenant?
One of the great things is him finding Jean-Pierre Léo. I mean, in a way, that's one of the greatest partnerships in cinema.
Oh la vache! Un cheval! Il est à mon père, c'est un souvenir. Oh, c'est méchamment grand chez toi, Tiens, aide-moi à débarrasser le divan. Tu dormiras là, incognito. Mais tes parents, ils ne viennent jamais ici. Ma mère picole et mon père passe son temps en course.
Here was this remarkable, virtually autobiographical film in which Léo actually became Truffaut.
Ouais, c'était toi, un petit salaud, qui m'a fait poirer tout à l'heure. Salaud, Morissette! Dégueulasse! Les choses sont comptées, Morissette! Ça t'est arrivé du monde, Morissette!
To me, he's like a child playing at making movies, and that's, I think, ties in a lot with his life story and how, you know, perhaps his childhood was an incredibly unhappy one.
They're wonderful portraits of Paris. I mean, Truffaut films are wonderful for that. He was one of the first directors, I think, with Becker, perhaps in Melville, to make high-angle shots of people in the streets in Paris. That was wonderful.
At the time, Paris was very black, you know. All the wall of the building was black, you know. Paris changed when André Malraux, cultural minister of General de Gaulle, decided to restore all the buildings of Paris, and Paris became a modern city.
Suddenly you get a feeling of the city and its architectural, you know, strangeness as well. And he was really one of the first, you know, filmmakers to show Paris in this very particular romantic way.
I met him 2 times by a year. We have a lunch, and the only thing we spoke was cinema, you know, nothing else, cinema. I went many times at the film du Carrosse, even when he was living there and working there. Everything was classified and so on. He was obsessed by the archives, you know, of his own life. But also he had some dossier on Godard, Rivette, dossier Romer, dossier Ophuls, dossier Chaplin.
He's a rebel with a cause. That's the definition of Truffaut. And like every rebel with a cause, he's smart enough not to go against the system. He thinks the best way to go against the system is to work within the system and kind of sabotage the system. So this is why he created his own production tool. And this is why he tried to be very, very well exposed on the international festival scene. he used that power of an established filmmaker to really work against all the cliches and the conventions of filmmaking in France.
Truffaut actually won a prize at Cannes, having been banned because he slagged off so many French movies in the newspapers, and then the following year they said, all right, you can come, and then he won because he'd made Quatre Cents Coups.